nobody ever believes anything catastrophic is ever really going to happen because it happens so infrequently, and they've been through this routine so many times. But most folks who left with 2 days worth of clothes, figured to go stay at a friend's house. Like my mother came to stay with me with the clothes on her back and perhaps some pajamas, and next thing you know, she didn't make it back to her house for about 6 weeks. That happened to a lot of folks, where you take the necessary precautions just in case, but you just, deep down, you really don't believe that anything catastrophic like that is going to happen. And I don't think anybody really dreamed that this was going to be as bad as it was. I certainly, I've been through all the academic exercises knowing that the potential for something like this existed, and even worse even, but I just never thought I'd ever see it in my lifetime.
South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint opened the hearing by reading a statement issued by the New Orleans Weather Forecast Office 20 hours before Hurricane Katrina hit the city. It was marked urgent.
Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks, perhaps longer. The vast majority of trees will be snapped or uprooted. Power outages will last for weeks, as most power poles will be down and transformers destroyed. Water shortages will make human suffering incredible by modern standards.
The next few days bore out the deadly accuracy of that forecast.
Katrina, for example, moving over very, very deep warm water in the Gulf, accelerated to a Category 4 in less than a day. And when it hit to the east of New Orleans, of course, it was, I think, Category 3 at that stage, which is very, very strong for a landfalling hurricane.
And usually we're just looking at utter devastation under those circumstances. And you can have storm surges up over 20 feet. And with Katrina, for example, it made landfall as a Category 3, but it built up a Category 5 storm surge, and along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we had storm surges, 20, 24, 25 feet. So, very, very damaging storm at the Category 5 level. Well, the way these things work, it's basically they feed off of the energy from the ocean. The energy is just a massive storage sink for energy. And when you get those temperatures up over 80 degrees, that's the energy that you need to feed that system.
Why is an increasing sea surface temperature important? And it's important because that's the thing that will give you more evaporation and more fuel for storms. And so when we look globally, in all these regions where we're getting an increase of sea surface temperature, we found a steady increase in the intensity of storms. And this seems consistent.
It takes over 80 degrees to really sustain a hurricane. And with Hurricane Katrina, we were in the mid-80s across much of the Gulf. And there were even some pockets where those sea surface temperatures were up near 90 degrees, which is just really unheard of. It was exceptionally warm for that storm.
When one looks at all of the tropical ocean basins, that the sea surface temperature is increasing. And it's increased by about 0.5 degree centigrade since 1970, which in its totality doesn't sound too much, but that means that we have increased the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere by 3 to 4%, and that's a substantial amount. That means evaporation has increased. It means there's more fuel for hurricanes think of a hurricane as a heat engine, and think of the water vapor and the release of latent heat as something driving that engine. We have a lot more fuel all of a sudden.
Hurricane Charlie confounded forecasters in August when, in the space of several hours, it dramatically increased in strength and changed course to come ashore in southwest Florida, where it caused billions of dollars in damage.
A recent study in the journal Science by a group of U.S. university researchers shows that the annual number of the strongest hurricanes, those with winds higher than 210 kilometers per hour, has almost doubled globally since 1990, from 10 to 18. Some scholars blame global warming. They say the heating of the atmosphere by the trapped gases from burning fossil fuel has caused warmer oceans and more moisture in the air. Ideal conditions for tropical cyclones.
We found that the number of Category 4 and 5 hurricanes had doubled since 1970, and this is a global phenomenon. All hurricanes in all the basins, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. Very striking result. And we also found that this increase was associated with an increase in tropical sea surface temperature over the same period of about 1 degree Fahrenheit. Not only are they bigger with higher winds, but they're lasting longer. And actually this increase in duration is even more striking than the increase in intensity. So the biggest storms are lasting a lot longer, with the potential to do a lot more damage.
Hurricane Francis is the second major hurricane to strike Florida in less than a month. Just 3 weeks ago, Hurricane Charlie devastated parts of southwest Florida, causing nearly 30 deaths and billions of dollars in damages.
Kerry Emanuel's work shows that clearly a Category 3 is not as strong as a Category 4, is not as strong as a Category 5. So if you have landfalling 3s, 4s, and 5s, and Kerry shows quite nicely that the amount of damage done goes as the cube of the wind speed. So it's not a linear increase. So you're getting, the stronger the storm, the more damage, but the more damage in a sort of exponential fashion. So that's the great worry.
First there was Charlie, then Francis, and now Ivan. 3 major hurricanes in a month that have destroyed lives, homes, and property across the Caribbean and the southeastern United States. Hurricane Ivan could produce a storm surge approaching 5 meters at some points along the low-lying Gulf Coast of the states of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana.
But there are other locations that also have their issues, like Miami or even New York City. We have, substantial populations basically in harm's way. And, Miami seems to cope with these things maybe a little bit better than New Orleans, but they have their issues too. And of course, New York City doesn't get very many of these and hasn't had one visit there in, quite some time. But I would argue that, those cities along the eastern seaboard are also highly vulnerable if a big one ever makes its way up into that neck of the woods.
The center of Gene will strike Florida early Sunday, becoming the 4th major hurricane to strike the state this year. Hurricane Gene is expected to cause extensive damage to the same part of Florida that Hurricane Francis struck 3 weeks ago. No state in the United States has been struck by 4 hurricanes in 1 year since 1886.
The most people I speak to, they say, what do you do? I say, I'm a climatologist. I say, is this global warming stuff true, or is it just baloney? And that's normally how the argument starts. There's no more basic questions asked beyond that statement. You say, yeah, I think look to Alaska, look what's happening maybe with hurricanes, but look to Alaska because there in the Arctic the things are changing very, very rapidly.
The warming that we're seeing up here in the Arctic, for example, which is relatively dramatic. It's about 3 to 4 degrees over the last 40, 50 years, is anthropogenic. It is man-made.
Well, we've seen very big changes in the climate of Alaska, as well as in other parts of the Arctic. We have thousands of glaciers here in Alaska, and practically everyone has seen a negative mass balance, meaning that it has lost mass. It's warmer, the glaciers are melting, they're losing mass, they're shrinking. They're in some cases disappearing out of sight, in some cases they may disappear completely. And of course, when ice melts, water runs off and contributes to sea level rise, which is a problem in many other areas. The runoff from Alaskan glaciers over the last 50 years is about 7 meters of water covering the entire state of Alaska. That's about 20 feet. 20 feet of water covering the entire state of Alaska. Or the equivalent would be that we could say, since Texas is about half the size of Alaska, that there would be 40 feet of water covering the entire state of Texas. That's a pretty large amount of water that has run off from Alaskan glaciers.
One of the world's leading hurricane experts says the 2005 Atlantic and Caribbean hurricane season will be well above average.
The Atlantic is well poised. The Atlantic is as warm as it's ever been, except for 1 year, 1998, which was a very active year.
Hurricane Dennis is one of the strongest storms to form this early in the hurricane season. The storm is a dangerous Category 4 hurricane on a scale of 1 to 5, with winds higher than 200 kilometers an hour.
Hurricane Katrina, during stages out over the Gulf of Mexico, got up to Category 5 strength. So it builds up the storm surge, relative to the strength it is at that specific moment. It actually made landfall as a Cat 3, but it still was packing that Cat 5 storm surge along with it.
Hurricane Katrina cut a deadly path across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama as it came ashore Monday morning. Whole coastal communities were wiped out. The situation was underscored at the New Orleans Superdome, the sports complex where some 25,000 people who took refuge from the storm wait in deteriorating conditions to be evacuated to Houston, Texas.
As New Orleans worked to recover from Katrina, about 200,000 people in southern Florida were ordered or encouraged to evacuate because of a storm named Rita. As Florida was being threatened by what could be the seventh hurricane to strike the state in the past 13 months, Governor Jeb Bush said he worried residents had become complacent about the risks. President Bush, the brother of Florida's governor, plans to come to the state on Thursday to assess the damage. Forecasters say Rita has become an extremely dangerous hurricane. The National Hurricane Center says the environment favors further strengthening. That means Rita could make landfall with the same intensity as Hurricane Katrina, which devastated portions of the Gulf Coast last month and left at least 1,000 people dead.
The whole issue of increasing hurricane intensity is rather frightening, especially for people who live in coastal regions. I mean, they're facing a threat not only from the winds, but enhanced precipitation. And if global warming is a main factor, then we're also facing the additional whammy of a sea level rise. So this makes our coastal regions very, very vulnerable.
Wilma, the eighth hurricane to hit the state of Florida in the past 15 months, cut a destructive swath across the southern Florida peninsula on Monday. It moved quickly from the Gulf Coast to the Atlantic Ocean, leaving more than 3 million people without electrical power and prompting President Bush to sign a disaster declaration for the damaged area. Floridians began lining up for ice, water, and gasoline on Tuesday as they assessed the damage from Hurricane Wilma, which caused as much as $9 billion in damage when it cut across the Florida peninsula with winds of more than 200 kilometers per hour.
So that the whole section of coastline between all of these storms in the last 2 years, from about Galveston over to Panama City, Florida, has essentially been wiped out. There's very few structures, along the immediate coastline that have actually survived the onslaught of Ivan, Dennis, Katrina, Rita, and Hurricane Cindy have all made landfall in the last 2 years in that specific area.
Since we began naming storms over 50 years ago, this was the first season to exhaust the names that were on the list, and we had to go to the Greek alphabet, uncharted territory, with Tropical Storm Alpha, Hurricane Beta, Tropical Storm Gamma, Tropical Storm Delta, and just an hour and a half ago, Tropical Storm Epsilon.
As you see, we actually saw 26 tropical storms, 13 hurricanes, and 7 major. And for both the forecast and the observed amounts, these are double to even triple that which we would see in an average season.
Very strong hurricanes like Katrina and Rita, they're not once-in-a-lifetime hurricanes, that we're going to be seeing more of them. There are a whole lot of stronger hurricanes out there, and there's no sign that this intensity is going to decrease.
There seems to be strong agreement between lower CO2 and ice ages and increased CO2 from anthropogenic causes and the sea surface temperature and land temperatures are increasing. This gives you more energy from hurricanes. I hesitate, though, to say that any one season is indicative of a trend. But when I look from 1995 all the way through 2005, I see that's 11 years of above average intensity. That makes me concerned.
I mean, I think the debate is really basically over. I think it's clear that it's happening. It's clear that it's due to human influences. It's clear clear that a lot of it's due to human influence, not all of it. And it's clear that it's going to accelerate.
I think the message that's coming through from these consensus assessments of the scientific community are pointing the finger at a real greenhouse effect on the atmosphere.
Now we have begun, humanity has begun to interfere with the climate, and that's the problem we're concerned with. So we're beginning to experiment with climate on a major scale, and that might dwarf anything that we have experienced or have witnessed in the past, and is a thing that is really of concern.
People think of themselves as relatively small. We think of the Earth as vast, as enormous. 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, the Earth was vast and enormous. The explorers thought that, hey, there's really no end to this thing. When we recognized that the Earth was a contained place, I think things started to change. It took 6 billion of us, really, to achieve what I would call global domination. We're huge. Our footprint is so big that it now covers the entire planet. And to not recognize that is real folly, I think.
There are two possibilities of why we're increasing sea surface temperature. And the first one is that it's part of some large natural variability like an El Nino or some type of decadal oscillation. And we see these. We can look at the sea surface temperature in the tropics of the North Atlantic, and you see the temperature going up and down. But what you don't find is that a natural variability which gives you a variation over the entire globe. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this slow creep of sea surface temperatures from about 1970 upwards all the way for 35 years. And that's occurring universally over the tropical oceans. And different parts of the sea surface temperature regions are going up and down, but there's this steady creep.
What is mystifying to me is why NOAA has issued such a categorical statement denying that there's any connection between global warming and hurricane activity. There's no scientific basis for that. I think it's irrational.
What NOAA did say was that that the variation of hurricanes that we are seeing is due to natural variability. Now, when one thinks of the large amount of evidence that people outside NOAA are presenting about, we have to look carefully at global warming. For the administrator to make a statement that is independent of even that possibility, I think is slightly irresponsible.
We've been told categorically by certain NOAA scientists that they have been told not to talk about the connection between hurricanes and global warming without first getting approval from their superiors.
I cannot believe that every person in NOAA sits there and says, yes, this poor science is true. Come on, you know, it's...
I mean, I am very concerned about scientists in NOAA saying that they're told by the administration not to talk about this subject. Any statement that comes out of NOAA is very carefully vetted by the NOAA administration and the lawyers. So I don't believe that we're hearing a scientifically honest statement from NOAA.
Well, this is antithetical to the scientific spirit, and it is really amazing that an organization that purports, among other things, to lead a major scientific research enterprise in the United States should be behaving this way.
This is a very sad thing that the majority of scientists in NOAA and NASA and EPA and so on, no matter what they feel, it boils down to the situation that they're family people trying to put their kids through college, pay a mortgage on a car, and if you're told that you better be quiet or you better be a little careful, what are you going to do? There are some things that it's one thing just to resign and make a stand, but how many people can do that and speak their minds? You can't do that. So I'm afraid that openness, in a sense, has to come from the top, has to come from honest people wanting honest statements being made.
When we started burning fossil fuels, we didn't understand this, but now that we do understand how this works, we do have a responsibility to confront the issue, at least scientifically, if not in a policy, by trying to sweep this issue under the rug and pretend the scientific facts don't exist. I mean, that's a big problem. I mean, that's the first order problem. And I think that's driven largely because they don't want to deal with the policy implications of this.
The way that the country is facing up to global warming can be thought of as we're in denial, it can't happen. But I think that the country is well aware, the administration is well aware that global warming is happening, but choose not to do anything about it.
In the context of the global warming debate, I mean, the hurricane has sort of been, in the association with global warming, has sort of been a catastrophe that the greenhouse warming topic hasn't really had. I mean, the melting of the glaciers in the Arctic and increasing of a few degrees and things like that hasn't really seemed like a catastrophe to the public, okay? But this potential association of greenhouse warming with hurricanes, I think, has brought this element of potential catastrophe into the public debate about greenhouse warming. So I think it's raised the urgency a little bit in terms of doing something about the fossil fuel issue.
The estimates from the IPCC range between roughly 1.5 to nearly 6 degrees by 2100, rising sea level, melting of land glaciers, increases in ocean heat content. Even at the lower end of these predictions, changes are likely to have significant impacts on many fields of human endeavor. It's those changes in extremes, floods, droughts, heavy precipitation events, those are the things that people actually feel that affect them very immediately.
When you fiddle around with the Earth's weather system, the climate system, you're affecting the precipitation levels, you're affecting the movement of the oceans, because all of these are very delicately balanced, and they change, if at all, over hundreds and thousands of years, fractionally. But what we've done in a short period of time is having brought about a massive change.
It's the old honesty thing again. You can pretend there's no global warming. But the honest thing to do is say, yes, there is. And then, can you do something about it? Or can you do something about stronger hurricanes? But at least you have to look at it. It's irresponsible not to.
If it is Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation or North Atlantic oscillation, or any of these oscillations, we should be seeing a downturn even already. But the fact that we had a record-breaking hurricane season last year makes us think that these ideas that they've been putting forward that we should see a downturn soon aren't going to materialize. I don't see anything that's going to lower the tropical sea surface temperatures anytime soon. So it looks like we're in for a long trend of increasing hurricane intensity associated with warming sea surface temperatures.
What worries me is that if one were to take heed to that warning, rather than pouring $200 billion into repairing what went on with Katrina and Rita, that maybe with taking mitigatory actions in terms of, I don't know, seawalls or moving populations or designing towns or levees differently in the anticipation of stronger storms, maybe the next Katrina will only cost $10 billion and maybe no lives will be lost. But otherwise, if you don't do that, you pour in $200 billion, you rebuild New Orleans, and you finish up some way down the line with exactly the same problem, another $200 billion. I don't know, I'm not an economist, I don't know how many $200 billion we can spare. It's a lot of money. It's easy to just throw money at a problem. It's very, very hard to think what we're going to do over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And I would think that to me, the sadness is that one should at least start to plan, one should at least start to think, one should at least start to think about the way that we can make things resistant to storms, ourselves more resilient to storms than we are now. And in the end, probably save a lot of people's lives and certainly save a lot of money. You know, spending $5 billion a year on the Gulf Coast it's a lot of money, but it's certainly better than every 2 or 3 years spending $200 billion for a new Katrina.
One of the great lessons that has to be learned from this is that we need to protect the natural barriers, that if the wetlands had been maintained and that vast stretch of land between New Orleans and the Gulf of Mexico had remained as trees, and if the barrier islands had been shored up, we wouldn't have seen such dramatic effects from Katrina.
50 years ago, we had a substantial wetland environment out there that really did suck a lot of energy out of those storms, and we've lost hundreds of square miles of those wetlands. And as a result, like I said, those storms are just making landfall now, much more close to the city itself.
Within all the record-breaking statistics of this past hurricane season, there are epic human impacts. There are heartfelt stories of people who have endured losses, great and small, fatalities and damage, and suffering on a very large scale. To simply hope for the best and expect it to happen is not realistic in this era of increased hurricane activity.
There are entire houses that, these shotgun houses lifted off their foundations, deposited in the middle of the street. You see, cars turned upside down. I actually saw one location, near the breaches where a house was laying down on top of a car. So you look inside the window of the house and you see a car inside the house. And that was, that's just bizarre. But you just see, sensational things like that, these catastrophic things all over the place, everywhere you turn. there's something else for the highlight reel. I mean, it's every way you look, there's something for the highlight reel. That's the thing that I think that going down there and snapping pictures and taking video doesn't. You don't really. You're capturing what's in the view, but what you don't realize is that you have the same thing to the right, to the left, behind you for miles. And that's just not, you just can't capture that, and that just doesn't come across over the television. And virtually my entire, the entire town was submerged in various depths of water. And my home's destroyed, my wife's former home is destroyed, my high school's gone, all the places I hung out are gone, everything in between is gone. And it's really, it's almost a surreal experience to go back down there and just see, what was just teeming with life. To see it with virtually nothing going on and just utter devastation, and sofas and carpet and sheetrock piled out on a lot of front lawns. It's really a pretty gruesome scene down there.
It looks pretty dramatic the last 15 years, which has been the time that we've seen the most increase. And so if this continues like it's been going, it's there's some scary prospects ahead of us.
My greatest fears are that we get to a stage where, with population and hence greenhouse warming, that we've come to a stage where we can't do anything, that we are the products of environmental change rather than the working out our own destiny, that we just become reactive rather than forging things the way we might want them to be. So that to me is a great worry.
I personally would be more comfortable if there were more emphasis placed on new means of energy development, more research in alternative energies, and even in cleaning up existing means of generating energy from fossil fuels. For instance, there are programs to segregate the carbon dioxide that's generated by the burning of oil and coal, and then injecting it into geological strata. Those approaches may well prove to be ultimately practical, but they won't be practical unless we research them and spend some serious money and serious effort on trying to figure out how to do it cost effectively.
You got to come up with a completely new global energy system. The world energy system is almost totally fossil fuel based, and so you could have a future world of 10 billion people getting its energy from something other than fossil fuels, or figuring out some way of not putting that CO2 into the atmosphere, even if you can still get energy from fossil fuels. Both very difficult. It is the biggest global environmental challenge, in my opinion. There are big biodiversity, land use impacts, those sorts of things. But the one thing that people are not going to be able to escape from anywhere on Earth is global climate change.
If, for instance, we built a better mousetrap, I think other nations would beat a path to our door. If we came up with ways of generating energy that were cheaper and better, less polluting than the existing methods for generating energy, I think that we wouldn't have any problem selling it, and it would be great for our economy as well. So there are win-win solutions out there possible. Whether they'll actually be realized is a big question.
My biggest fear is that we'll be seen as a generation that knew better but didn't do better. The facts are clear; they've been clear. I don't want my grandchildren looking at me in a world of floods and plagues and wars, asking, why didn't you take a stand and give us a different future than this nightmare future we inherited? That's my biggest fear. And my biggest hope is that our grandchildren will be proud of us, that we stood up to the challenge, we stepped up to the plate, and we made sure that they had a robust economy with clean energy, clear skies, and a real future. Let the young people, let the people who are yet to be born inherit a planet that they can dream on and that they can move forward together on. What is the legacy that we're going to be leaving to our grandchildren? We're going to have to answer the question, you knew better, did you do better? I want to say we did better.